Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this ArtsQuest at Home presentation. This tribute to John Waters, the Sultan of Sleaze, a John Waters appreciation show. So happy to have you here with us. My name is Ryan Hill, Programming Director at ArtsQuest. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for continuing to let us do what we love to do, which is providing access to the arts, to the Lehigh Valley and beyond. And we thank our sponsor, BSI Corporate Benefits, for helping us do that with this ArtsQuest at Home presentation. Find out more about what we're doing at artsquest.org/at-home. And coming up in just a few days, next Monday, we have a panel kind of like this, but on Pixar movies. I have to imagine a lot of John Waters fans, also big, huge fans of Pixar too. That's there for you. That's Monday, 8 o'clock. You can sign up for that at artsquest.org/at-home. Tomorrow, two comedy shows, a comedy game show called Mind Meld. It's our version of the match game. That's at 8 o'clock. And then 9:30, a show we call Quarantine with Children, where comics who have kids get drunk and bitch about it. And also another big piece of news. We actually just set this date. July 8th is going to be our day when we reopen the Frank Banko Alehouse Cinemas in that building behind me that's being projected onto my kitchen wall. We're going to be releasing details on that shortly, but the movies we'll be coming back with include The Empire Strikes Back, Black Panther, also John Lewis, Good Trouble, and Raiders of the Lost Ark. And we're going to have more stuff as we get ready to hopefully be also able to open Christopher Nolan's Tenet at the end of the month. Again, more information on that in the coming days. Also, we want to thank everybody who chose the pay what you will option for this. Again, every little bit helps us make sure that we can reopen those doors safely, as we're going to be putting in a lot of different methods to make sure, to ensure people's safety as they're in there. So thank you so much to those of you who did that. Again, we're just thankful that everybody's here and watching this, and again, allowing us to still do this stuff and provide access to the arts and talk about great movies and great directors like John Waters. So I want to get you started with a couple quick things. First off, we do recommend that you watch this particular show, this event on Zoom here in the speaker view, not gallery view, speaker view. You can toggle that typically to the top right. It'll make for a better viewing experience for you. Also, too, just a heads up, there will be adult language in this. So if you've got kids in the room, just be aware. If you brought kids to this John Waters Appreciation Show, that's pretty awesome. Those kids are going to grow up pretty awesome too. So just know they're going to hear the words fuck, shit, and a lot of other things like that. And that's pretty much it. I want to bring you to your hosts right now. These two incredibly talented women include our co-curator of the First Saturday Horror Series, also a writer for the cinema blog Cinepunks, and also our former intern. This is the next one. She's a former intern, a film producer, and a videographer also, who just graduated from Kutztown University. So please welcome, respectively, Adriana Goberg and Miranda Schollenberger.
Thank you, Ryan.
Hello. Thank you. Wow, I did not expect this many people to show up. This is incredible.
Nice to see so much love for John Waters.
Seriously.
And I just want to say, if for those of you tuning in who enjoyed the pre-show music, that's all from a compilation album called A Date with John Waters that John Waters curated. And you can buy it pretty much anywhere where CDs are available. So John Waters, I mean, he's been an enduring and singular presence in film for over 50 years now. He came into prominence in the early 70s with his Trash trilogy, Pink Flamingos, Female Treble, and Desperate Living. But then he really diversified as his career progressed. You know, he branched out into melodramas, satire, musicals, even with Cry Baby. Over the years, he's also become a very accomplished visual artist and a public speaker. He has a popular one-man show, This Filthy World, which he then kind of like turns into a Christmas themed show every December. And it's just been interesting as a fan. I mean, I've been a John Waters fan since I was in my early teens, and it's been interesting seeing how he has found a new audience. I guess that's part of what we're going to unpack here tonight. But I'd like to introduce our panelists, our guest panelists, or rather, how about you guys introduce yourselves, starting with Keith.
Hello, everyone. I'm Keith Garcia. I'm the artistic director of the C Film Center in Denver, Colorado, part of the Denver Film Society. Been working with that organization for about 15 years in various programming capacities. I'm a filmmaker on the side. I've been working for 12 years on a documentary about drag entitled The Heels Have Eyes. That is about our local drag community, but the drag community in the world as a whole. Hoping to have that wrapped up next year. And and John Waters has, I think, always kind of been part of the fabric of my life since I was a wee child. But we'll get into all that a little bit later.
How about you, Sophia?
Hey everyone, my name is Sophia Verbiskar. I am currently a displaced freelance projectionist in the time of COVID, but I have spent the last half of my life being involved in theater management, projection, film festival events, and as Keith said, John Waters is truly a part of my psyche. I was introduced to him at the age of 13. So, we're going to unpack all of that, and I'm so excited to do it. I'm currently in the Lehigh Valley, where I met the amazing Adriana, who invited me to be a part of this. So I'm so excited.
And Justin, are you there?
Yes. Hi, I'm Justin LaLiberty. I'm the archivist for Vinegar Syndrome. Before that, I was a programmer for a few years for Alamo Drafthouse. And prior to that, I worked as a projectionist at a bunch of different theaters and also for the Maryland Film Festival, where I got to spend a lot of time with John Waters. So this is really exciting.
I did not know that. We're definitely going to talk about that.
Yes.
That is awesome.
Yes.
I guess I want to start things off just talking about how we came to John Waters' work. So if anyone wants to share, like, what is your earliest John Waters memory?
So I'm actually pretty new to John Waters. In my American Independent Cinema class in college, I took that my junior year. So I think I was like 20, and we saw people like Miranda July, Vincent Gallo, just basically all American independent directors. And the one day my professor was like, hey, we're going to watch John Waters. And he was like, I have to give you guys a forewarning. Like, there are things that are going to make you say, what the hell am I watching right now? And as soon as I heard that, I was like, all right, I'm ready to go on this roller coaster. So we watched Female Trouble. And obviously I'm in love. I also have Mink Stoll actually signed this poster, and it says to Miranda, so that's super cool. But then I also have a Divine tattoo. So I'm super obsessed about Divine. I'm sure we'll get into talking about Divine, but I am pretty new to him, but I am obsessed with him.
Does anyone else want to share?
I guess, oh, sorry, you can go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead, Sophia.
So it's a pretty funny anecdote, I feel, is when I was either when I was 13 or 14, and shout out to my dad, he is watching. I was gifted 3 DVDs, and one was Blue Velvet, and one was a title I can't remember, and the third one was Pink Flamingos. And I was 13 or 14, and my dad was like, here you go. Here's some shit for you to watch. And ever since then, I've just been so lucky to have John Waters as a part of my development in my individuality and how I see the world and how I appreciate all the people that I come across. So it's kind of funny that, you don't expect a parent to give you Pink Flamingos for your early teen birthday gift, but I am so thankful for that.
When I was I can never pinpoint exactly the year, if I was 11 or 12, it was sort of a formative year of watching movies in my life. That was the year that I saw what I kind of equate as my top 2 favorite films, which is Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Women on the Verge of Nervous Breakdown, which for a 12-year-old is a really interesting foray into cinema as a whole. But also that year, me and my friend, who often had sleepovers and video store rental nights at their house on the weekends, rented Hairspray and Pink Flamingos. And Hairspray we watched first, and that was my first like, oh, John Watt, this is a fun movie. This is really cool, really getting into a lot of it. Oh, same director did Pink Flamingos. Let's watch that. Wildly different slice of John Waters. I think by the time we got to The Singing Butthole, we kind of knew we were onto something very special in our movie watching lives. And so ever since then, it kind of became just a process of, and this is the day that it was VHS tapes is what we watched this on, hunting down the rest of John Waters' canon over the years to just kind of like fit in the pieces and try to make an idea of who this filmmaker was and who Divine was, and all this stuff. And yeah, just always been very integral to my life. I mean, obviously with drag too, and my interest there, a lot of that comes from Divine and Divine's kind of definite punk rock entrance into the world of just being who they wanted to be no matter what. I do have a Divine tattoo here on my own little arm. But other than that, that's been my little entree into
Nice.
Mr. Waters and his world.
Justin, do you have one to
Yeah.
share?
So when I entered middle school, my mom's like reward to me was getting the video store to lift permissions so that I could rent whatever I wanted to rent. And it was really just an excuse for her not to have to go in there to like sign things out to me anymore. So the like edgier adult kind of cult section was basically where the adult room was. And as like an 11-year-old boy, I really wanted to go in the porn room. So it was the best excuse I had to like get near the porn room was to like, I want to rent heavy metal. But when I went to go rent heavy metal, Pink Flamingos was on the same shelf. And it, you know, I had some kind of quote. This was like back when New Line had re-released it. So they had like all these quotes about how shocking it was. I was like, well, I have to see it. So I rented it and watched it on Thanksgiving at my grandmother's house. And my mom walked in during the chicken scene and everything was weird after that.
Yeah, I mean, when I first discovered John Waters, I was around, I think, 13 or 14 years old. And at the time, I was a bit of an edgelord. So I was attempting to track down like every depraved, weird film I could find. And that's how I arrived at Pink Flamingos. And then I pretty much fell head over heels immediately. There's a common trend in all these stories is that, you know, we all discovered John Waters when we were very young during our formative years. And something that always resonated with me in his work is sort of the way that he celebrates the outsider. And, you know, I think I mentioned this to some of you earlier in the week, but there's just something about his work and him as a person that always made me feel very seen and very comfortable with who I am. And so I think that kind of brings us to the fact that there is I think a very queer sensibility to all of his work. Sometimes it's more pronounced, as with, you know, in Female Trouble, you have Aunt Ida constantly harping on her nephew about how she needs to find him a good boyfriend. And then in other ways, it's kind of more aesthetic. So I don't know. I'm just curious if that is an aspect of his films that resonates with the rest of you as much as it does for me.
Yeah, I think that's really important. But it's also, there's something about that, like where he, you know, he admires and like respects outsiders, and like you're comfortable being that around him, or like kind of when watching his films, like you can identify and it doesn't feel like you're being judged. But at the same, he like approaches it so sweetly. There's almost like, I don't want to say there's like a naivete to it, but like, especially with A Dirty Shame, which I don't think is like a great movie, but you know, when that was coming out and the MPAA wanted to give it an NC-17, and there was all of like his reaction to it is like, why? Like, it's just this movie about like perverts, and there's no like explicit sex in it. Like, there's nothing in that movie that really goes beyond like what you kind of see in like Judd Apatow movies, like post when that came out. And it's just that it was almost just because it was him. is like, this is kind of what it gets. And there's that neutered version that just kind of like is like a joke. It's just like a total joke. And I think that's kind of his way of being like, the version that's uncensored embraces outsiders and people who are different. And like, if you want to conform, you get kind of the duller rating.
I was gonna say, another thing, like why we had that class in college was to show that like we could make movies on like low budget. And even though John Waters did get money from his dad, and he would make it back, like get the gross back, and then pay him back like interest on top of that, it still had the like quality of it not being so good, but it still had something that you would never see before. And like also bringing like Michael Potter to play like Gator in Female Trouble, like you wouldn't see that like normally like on a screen, like his like aesthetic, but John Waters embraced that, and that's like what makes his like film so unique and iconic, because there's just these characters like Edith Massey, who plays Aunt Ida, that my best friend has never, like, we watched John Waters together, and now she's like obsessed with Edith Massey, like always just talking about the egg lady and everything. So she's just so good. So John Waters just embraces people that are weird, and that's something that I've always embraced, and that's something that like I want to bring through like my work as I go like through being a director. So
Well, and to your point, there's a lot of, I think what John Waters really represents on a sheen of, I mean, we'll just say a little sheen, a little crumbled topping of dog poop, is a lot of heart and passion.
Absolutely.
Like that low budget, as any of us who've worked on a low budget film or even just like a little project with someone, is the people that are doing that project want to be there and are willing to not be paid or just have bologna sandwiches as your catering or like whatever, to get it done. And the more fun that you can make that set, the more loyal you get these friends to just stick with you and be part of your message. And I think he just found the right group of people who also were just like, whatever, we're making movies. And there's not one false note in any of his films. Like, you can look at other low budget films that were produced much more seriously and perhaps less fun, and you feel false notes throughout those. Like they'll tout, we made this movie for $7,000. And if it doesn't speak to a real reason to be, even though it's a satire about, an overweight housewife dealing with, her husband wanting to get her out of the picture, all those things that polyester kind of represents, like, it could be about a far more serious thing and you won't care as much because you're just not feeling the passion that Divine went through, just putting herself through the ringer as an actress, just to put all that out there. And so much of that, I mean, I've always wanted to, someday maybe I'll have a conversation with Mr. Waters, not necessarily about his movies in that sense in the filmmaking process, but just sort of like where his real like passion with all that kind of lay. Because that's really, if we can all find that for ourselves, I think we'll all be much better people in the end. It's finding where to find that cheap passion.
Totally. Sophia, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I love everybody's commentary, and I think that cheapness mixed with the friendships that translates through the storyline or the plot through the screen to the audience members, and it's something that you can't make up. As a lot of, you can't write this shit is what a lot of people say, and I think John Waters really embodied that in his early films with his crew, his friends, the people he was meeting that, are you down to make this? Yes, I am. Okay. And feeding off of that energy. The other thing I found was interesting when I was kind of, watching a few more recent things, his talks on Mr. Know-It-All when he was kind of doing that circuit, is he always tries to use shock to change your mind and not to gross out. And I really love that nuance, is that it's easy to be like, oh, John Waters is shocking and trashy and all of this, but what it really does is it expands your mind to accept maybe not exactly what's on screen, but just expands your mind to accept so much more about the world. And that's what I love about him, is that he really just opens up, even if it's a creak at first in your mind, is that he is a person in this world that expands your view, and your peripheral vision kind of becomes wider when you really start to understand what he provides artistically.
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes people look at me askance when I say this, but I feel like John Waters is someone whose work is all about empathy and, and challenging his audience to relate to people who seem on the fringe or who seem extreme. But really, there's a lot of love and compassion at the core of his work. I want to go back to something that you said, Keith. You had mentioned that, Divine's look influenced a certain kind of punk aesthetic. Something I think about a lot is how wide-ranging John Waters' influence actually is, because of course people think about the impact he's made on filmmakers and other creatives working in the industry. But I mean, he has his fingers in so many pies in musical theater world, fashion. Of course, he's on like kind of like the college circuit as well, doing speaking engagements at graduations. He's an advocate for prison reform, and of course he's a big LGBT rights activist as well. I don't know. I guess where I'm going with this is, do you ever think about his non-film work, or do you sort of have do you have like a favorite non-film related thing that John Waters does or is involved with?
I mean, I would just kind of say, at least from my perspective, his life in general is kind of an interest to me. I've always kind of connected dots in certain ways to people that he works with. Like, I'm a big fan, along with Dreg, of Peaches Christ, who grew up in Baltimore and has become personal friends over the years with John Waters, and often has little tales that they tell of going to those infamous Christmas parties and all that stuff. But growing from there, like Peaches Christ as a drag performer has a John Waters aspect to them most of the time that carries over. And you can start to look at those fashion things. You can start to look at the influence that Divine was Divine's own creation, but John Waters definitely like zhuzhed up what Divine could, like, you think you can only do this, but we're going to put you on camera. So let's make you just as beautiful as Elizabeth Taylor in your own way.
I think Van Smith was a big part of that too. The artist who helped Divine create that look.
Absolutely. And I mean, you just look at when Divine really became more notable in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a lot of Divine copying, but reinterpreting like Debbie Harry and sort of like the world that Debbie Harry and that rock to disco punk aesthetic was doing, and saying, well, I don't look like Debbie Harry, but I'm more beautiful than Debbie Harry in my own way, and I'll fit in that dress that Debbie Harry was wearing at that concert. It's just going to fit on me differently, and just sort of putting that "fuck you" attitude. I am who I am, and you can't judge me for anything, which is a really great way to live. Like just just go out there, whoever you want to be, however you want to feel. And that's in essence too where all his movies kind of come from, is just letting people be people. Having Hairspray been the first movie that I saw alongside Pink Flamingos was always interesting, because I learned so much from watching Hairspray about civil rights that, I mean, I was in school at the time that I watched that movie, and I learned more from his hour-and-a-half comedy than I did sitting in all the classes that I did, which in 2020, we all know that that's a testament to sort of the situation we're in currently right now. But on the flip side of looking at Pink Flamingos, where you're looking at literally described as the worst people alive, you still find an empathy for them. You find that familiarity where you're like, I might not have a desire to, give a blowjob to my son, But I can understand Divine's character and her desire for wanting to do this or hating that person or whatever. Even in their just like weirdness and all their negatives, they're still empathetic. We're still empathetic to them as viewers. We're finding those little parts where we're like, well, but I do fancy chickens from time to time. Like whatever it is you may be, whatever your other side thing, he seems to know where that hits on everybody, and is very happy to just sort of bring that out to the open and sort of dare us to turn away, knowing that we know full well that we do it too.
Totally. Justin, how about you?
As far as things like outside of his film work, I really love how much he like advocates for true crime. So I think, Serial Mom is actually the first John Waters movie I saw before Pink Flamingos was Serial Mom when it came out. And that was probably my first exposure to like what true crime was. And then his show, that Till Death Do Us Part show, was great. And just kind of even like reading a lot of his writing, like true crime just pops up so much. It's just in his like kind of proclivity for showing up at trials, which is hilarious. He just likes to go to trials, and he like was pen pals with different people who were in prison. And I think that is, of course, the prison reform stuff comes up a lot too. But yeah, I think his idea of just kind of like spreading true crime and having been doing that for so long before it like reached this kind of cultural boom that we're in now. So I think he's always like ahead of the curve, and just as like a cultural curator, he's really great. Like his top 10 lists every year are awesome. I look forward to them. And then his CDs, like the one you had used at the beginning and the one he has for Christmas, like those are great. And it's just, I feel like he kind of is always pulling like pieces of culture out that are like very on brand for him. And it's almost like a better version of what Tarantino does. So it's, what Tarantino does is like so obvious to the point that it like feels like parody to me. But there's something about John Waters that feels like he's like unearthing these things from America that like nobody either knew existed or didn't want to kind of have out there anymore. And I really love that. And it's not even necessarily pieces of like content, but just like ideas. And I feel like every other interview I read with him is something that I didn't know that I am happy I know now.
Yeah, I always come away, whenever I read a John Waters interview or I see him do a talk, like I always come away from it feeling enriched, because you're right, like he always brings up something I didn't know about, like some weird pop culture curio or obscure bit of information, and I'm like, oh my God, I need to get home so I can Google as much about this as possible. Yeah, it's great. Sophia, what about you?
I absolutely adore Crackpot, which you and I had texted about, my very special personal copy that I have. When he signed it, he kind of was taken aback. He hadn't recognized the cover, and I was worried that it was like some sort of counterfeit, but I think it was just some, lesser known cover. But anyhow, I was going through that this past weekend, exactly as Justin touched on with the true crime and his advocacy for prison reform. I don't know how to put it lightly, but he's almost this working anthropologist on top of being a filmmaker and, a writer and, kind of this muse throughout the world, especially in our generation and the next generation. He's so influential. He really does spend his time outside of his filmmaking work collecting this information that's so valuable for us to understand the human condition. He has also spoken about the need to understand both extremes in culture to be able to find true freedom. If you don't know what the extremes are, how can a society come to a point where we agree on what is right for us? So, I mean, the fact that he would go to prisons regularly and he would show his films at prison is so great, and kind of, does satisfy, I think, a bit of his morbid curiosity, which I think we all agree that he innately has. But it is also collecting valuable information and uplifting voices in so many different populations that otherwise wouldn't be noticed or would still be put in that box of it's weird, it's trashy, oh, we don't want to think about it. And bottom line, he's the most charming man on the planet. I mean, he's just so lovable, and the way that he combines that charm, intelligence, and love for the human condition, I think is what makes him a treasure in this world. So yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point, and like something that comes up from time to time is I'll be talking to someone who isn't very familiar with his work other than Pink Flamingos, and this idea that people have about who he must be as a person because of his work is always so off base. I mean, he's like this avuncular figure, but people get a certain impression of him from his films, and that kind of they don't really care to dig deeper. But now he's just great. I think you really touched on how that humanitarian aspect to him that I don't think people really talk about enough. Miranda, what about you?
So what you just said was like perfect, because I wanted to talk about Divine and like how he has so much empathy and everything, but he always like called Divine the most beautiful woman in the world. So like that just shows like how much he sees like in a person. And that's another thing. Like he saw like what Divine could do, and he just like threw Divine onto the screen, and then Divine like took it and ran with it. And I felt like that was like such a good thing, that he was like a platform for Divine in a sense. And he started at such like a low level, and now like majority of people know who Divine is. But I'm currently reading his book, Mr. Know-It-All, and the activism. One thing that I thought was super awesome, I just watched an interview with him, and he just tripped on acid like at the age of 70, and I was like, hell yeah, man. He was like, it was still the same exact experience when I was 20. But no, just a down-to-earth person that he is. My girlfriend and I were supposed to go see him speak in Phoenixville, but it got canceled because of COVID, so that's a bummer.
I was supposed to go to that show as well, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Damn.
Keith, you touched on something else earlier about, this gang of regulars who, were present for pretty much every movie John Waters has made, since, pre-Mondo Trasho, like his really early short films. And his acting troupe, or they're known as the Dreamlanders, and I think they are as almost as important, if not as important, to in terms of like what makes these films what they are, as much as John Waters is himself. I mean, you have Van Smith, who I already mentioned. He was the man who helped shape Divine's drag look. He had the idea to shave Divine's hair back, so he had like his hairline was like far back. And then you have like Vincent Peranio, who was the production designer for all of his films. He built Lobstora, the giant lobster, and Multiple Maniacs. And then of course like Mink Stole, Mary Vivian Pierce. This whole group of familiar faces who kind of really help shape the tone and the character of his film. So my question for you guys is, who is your favorite Dreamlander, other than John Waters and Divine? I'll go first. Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say, I think my favorite is, Mink, you got to give it up for Mink Stole. She's my favorite part of Female Trouble. I mean, Taffy, the tantrums she throws are legendary. She has some of the best lines. I wouldn't, I love her, and David Lockery. I think those two are my favorite.
I would have to second with Mink Stole. A lot of reasons were mostly her ability to really transform
Yes.
throughout all these films. Like, She has played every level of a character within John Waters' universe. I had the pleasure of inviting her out for our LGBTQ festival, Cinema Q, here in Denver about 7 years ago. We just wanted to bring her out as a queer icon and show a double feature of her work and then just have her talk to folks. And I got to spend like 2 days basically like taking her around town and having dinners and lunches and chatting and taking her to the thrift store because she really loves thrifting. And just things like that. And she was just the nicest woman with just the best perspective of her role in the world, which is that she's a regular gal, but so many people know her as these wild AF women. And she knows that sometimes when people are coming up, that they see her, but they're thinking Taffy, and how she has to kind of represent. She doesn't suddenly turn into Taffy when she's talking to them, but she has to not. It's like when a child meets an actor who's the voice of, a Pixar character or something like that, where that disconnect is going to throw that kid off, that Buzz Lightyear, that Tim Allen's and talking to them, but that he doesn't look like Buzz Lightyear. But just she had such a smart way of just like being able to address every single person that looks at her with love in their eyes, but then also is running through like, well, which character of yours is my favorite? And hope that it's the one that isn't a deplorable person. But for that effect, and the fact that she's been able to roll her entire career this long and find new things to do that are fun and interesting and still maintain that same love for all these films at this point makes her my favorite. So Mink Stole it is. Cheers to Mink Stole.
Sophia, what about you?
I'm gonna third Mink Stole all the way. I love how Keith's anecdote of how she is in person just kind of solidified how much I love her. Who wouldn't want to be basically best friends with John Waters for 50 years? And actually, when he tripped on LSD, or when he took LSD most recently, it was him and Mink taking it together. And I was just like, she's
Friendship goals.
Yeah, exactly. On top of the performances, it's like, all right, yeah, she's my favorite Dreamlander, 100%.
Justin, who's your favorite?
I mean, I was gonna say Mink, but I feel like this is becoming like a Mink thing. So I mean, for me, it would probably be otherwise. The one that attracts me to everything is Edie. I mean, I don't think she really like fits in with all the Dreamlanders necessarily, but as far as like a dominating force in John Waters movies that isn't divine, I think Edie really is like somebody you never see anywhere else, and you can't really imagine seeing anywhere else. Like, I don't feel like that crosses over. Like, it feels so in tune with what John Waters is doing, and she's just fantastic. So yeah, Edie.
Yeah, she was my second. She was my backup.
Yeah.
Go on, Miranda.
Oh no, I was just gonna say Edie, and then same with Mink Stole as well. And then Michael Potter. I do like Michael Potter. I think he plays well in Female Trouble for sure.
Yep. I think, Ryan, are you still on the call?
Yes, I am.
Do we have any audience questions?
No, because you didn't tell me to ask for audience questions yet.
Okay, I am now asking for audience questions. If there's anyone watching who has questions for us, go ahead and send them.
Yeah, go ahead and shoot them to me in the chat, and I'll be happy to jump on and ask them for you. But in the meantime, go ahead and go on to another thing, and I'll be hitting up everybody to see if they've got any questions.
Sure, okay. Yeah, I mean, as far as Edith Massey, of course the egg lady is forgettable, but I kind of prefer her in Female Trouble. I mean, her whole bit about being obsessed with her nephew needing to be gay is so amazing to me. I mean, it's such a great subversion of this thing that you often see in films where, someone is struggling with their sexuality and their parents are unaccepting of that, that they do not want their children to be queer in any way. And then of course you have John Waters subvert that and create a character who is like unrelentingly like the most P flag mom imaginable before like P flag really became like prominent. And just that, I mean, that unforgettable line, like the world of the heterosexual is a sick and boring life is, I mean, I have that on a t-shirt. Yeah, so I mean, definitely behind Ming Stoll and David Lockery, Edith Massey is, you know, among my favorite Dreamlanders.
I would have to say too, Edith Massey as Cuddles in Polyester is like, like that to me is her. That's a defining role for her, and a really good thing with her as Cuddles in that movie is you truly understand that she was not a good actress. Like that's. John Waters never hid that he was never trying to pull the wool over our eyes and make us think that she was a good actress. He was just like, I want the world to love this person in whatever they're doing. And as Cuddles, just being this debutante and just so unaware of everything, which in essence Edith was, unaware of everything around her. I was at a screening of Polyester last September in New York City, where John Waters was talking about working with her, and that they had her say the line, poor Francine, about 50 times. And she could never say poor Francine. And what's in the movie is all they could get her to do, which is purr Francine, like purr like a cat. And it just was, we didn't know, he just said we didn't know what to do to get her to understand that poor was the word we needed to come out of her mouth. And, but then he's like, but in the end, like he tells people to this day, like, oh, well, purr you. Like he has switched poor out of his vernacular and replaced it with purr because of Edith Massey and her inability to process that simple acting task.
That's amazing. Was that at the IFC Center by any chance?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was.
I did not attend that, but I saw him when he presented the restoration of Multiple Maniacs and Female Trouble. So
Nice.
I think Ryan has one question for us from the audience. So.
Yes, from Andrew. Andrew wanted to know from the panel: has Waters ever gone too far for any of you in any of his films? Has he ever crossed the line?
No.
Oh.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything where I thought, gee, that's almost too much for me. I think I need to turn this off for a second.
Like, I mean, I suppose at 12, watching A Singing Butthole was the first time I saw it, but I innately knew right then that was not too much, that still was not too much. So I think if anything, he kicked the wall back with that presentation to me as a kid, to just be like, you got to do better than A Singing Butthole to shock me. So.
Well, I think as well that once you are introduced to John Waters, whichever is, you know, the first screening experience that you have, is that there is this innate trust, which especially over the decades just continues to grow as a fan, or even people who are just being introduced to him, is that you trust that he has, you know, a moral compass, or he has a wisdom about him that, you know, yeah, show me whatever, John Waters, because you kind of already have me. And I do still trust him. I guess that's the best way to put it, is there's a system of trust with what John Waters provides to his fan base and to the world.
How about you, Justin?
I still think, like, and he says it too, that the most like transgressive or subversive thing he did was Hairspray, because he got it into schools all across the country. And I think that's probably the most shocking thing he did, is he got like all these schools to care about civil rights and like not be ashamed of like who people are. And that's like, he did that, like John Waters of all people. And I think that's probably the most shocking thing he's done.
I think he himself agrees. Like he's talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
About how he thinks that's like the most subversive thing he's ever done. What about you, Miranda?
I don't think there's anything. We only got. I remember when we were watching Female Trouble, we we were told about the scene where, like, the mattress scene, like where he ends up having sex with himself, basically, and then you see him like take the wallet out of his pocket, which I thought was pretty like great and genius of John Waters to do that. But no, it's John Waters. You have to accept it. It's him.
Speaking about the singing butthole, the man that butthole belongs to just passed away a few days ago. David E.
I heard,
Gluck. And that was
I heard about that.
Oh man.
Yeah, John Waters kept his identity secret this entire time, and then finally it was revealed after he passed away because that was their agreement. But it was nice seeing his name finally, and all of these like very fond remembrances all over social media about the first time everybody saw that scene, and it somehow it made that very notorious clip seem like super wholesome. Ryan, have we gotten any more questions?
Yes, we have a specific one just about a specific movie. That she just wants to know, what do you think of Cecil B. Demented?
I really love that movie, but I mean, I love it because it's full of like film nerd in jokes that may seem kind of like esoteric or inaccessible to like general audiences, but like I'm all about it. I've always really enjoyed it. And there's like a meta quality to it as well, because in at least on one level, the film is John Waters like commenting on Patricia Hearst, who became a great friend of his, but everything that happened with her. But yeah, I mean, I've always liked Cecil B. Demented, but it's kind of one of the more polarizing films in his filmography. So, you know, the other panelists may feel differently.
I really like it too, pretty much for the same reasons you said. When I was a kid, like, well, teenager, like when it came out, I really wanted to get one of those tattoos.
Me too.
My like stupid favorite filmmaker tattoo, which of course I never did, but yeah, that's what I always think of when I see like people wearing like directors' names on their shirts, is the tattoos from Cecil B. Demented.
Yeah, there's a plan for real estate on my body for the Almodovar tattoo in the same style as as the one from Cecil B. Demented. I mean, I was running a movie theater when Cecil B. Demented came out. We played it, and I just kept thinking about how this movie was made for film nerds and movie theater workers, and that's it.
The scene where they like crash that movie theater, and they're like trashing the concession stand, like criticizing how expensive all of the concessions are, always cracks me up. Anybody else?
That's one of the movies I've not seen by John Waters, so I'll have to be checking that one out.
Is it
Yeah.
available on streaming? Does anyone know?
Yeah, it's on something. I watched it recently. Again, it's on like Tubi or Vudu or something.
I can look it up real quick.
Yeah, I'm going to be completely transparent. It's one of the few that I haven't watched, but just listening to you talk about the fact that a concession stand gets trashed and everything, it's kind of having a moment here.
You would love it. You would love it. So
I bet. I know. I'm like, okay, this is.
So I looked it up. It is on Amazon Prime, and I also got a comment saying it's on iTunes also.
Nice.
And Tubi, as was mentioned before.
Tubi is free with commercials.
Tubi is free.
Probably the best option.
Love it.
God bless Tubi.
Any more questions, Ryan?
Yeah, so I have a comment. I'm that guy via that other guy. So this came from Doug, who said, Roger Ebert gave Pink Flamingo 0 stars. He didn't even consider it a movie. But he also said John Waters was probably one of the nicest people he had ever met. Discuss.
I mean, I really appreciate Robert Ebert's perspective, even when I don't agree with him. But sometimes he pulls stuff and I just cannot. I got to disavow it, and that's one of them. His like condemnation of Blue Velvet is another thing that gets to me, because that's one of my all-time favorite movies. So I cannot hang with Robert Ebert on either of those things. But
He's right about John Waters being the nicest person ever.
Yeah.
True. Yes, agree with that one.
I can endorse that.
Yeah, Roger Ebert is always, I mean, when Siskel and Ebert both like tried to take down slasher films back in the early 80s, as someone as a kid who loved them back then, I was always just like, shh, quiet. But you know, it's hit or miss. I mean, Roger Ebert can speak really well when something is great. I always thought that was one of his big strengths, was being able to really elevate a film when it is truly really great. What things he didn't like, I mean, I always just try to remind people that he wrote Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. So
Yes, I was going to bring that up
you
because
gotta just take it with a grain of salt.
on the Criterion put that out on Blu-ray a little while ago, and there's some great special features with John Waters discussing the film, and I mean, it's as entertaining and informative as you can imagine. But yeah, that's immediately what I thought of actually when Ryan brought up that Roger Ebert, because I really love Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, and it's so schlocky. I don't know. It's kind of weird that he wrote it, and
it was like,
Yeah, that is.
it was him, and you know, Russ Meyer and him were very good friends, brought together by their love of giant breasts. As I mean, both of their wives were very, very, very well endowed at the time. And who knows what other drugs were in the play, and whiskey. And I mean, I can only imagine being best friends with Russ Meyer had its own skew. Like you've got John Waters on this side, you've got Russ Meyer on this side. It's going to take you down a whole different path, deciding which choose your adventure you want. So
I do have to say, I think that's a perfect dichotomy, as we've been talking about, is Pink Flamingos getting, you know, 0 from Roger Ebert, but at the same time he's saying, well, John Waters was the nicest person I could meet. I don't need Roger Ebert to say 4 stars for Pink Flamingos. He says his point right then and there. That's the juxtaposition and the dichotomy that John Waters has always perpetuated throughout his entire career. So I kind of get a kick out of that. You know, it's just, it encapsulates how so many people feel about him, maybe on the surface level, you know, for people who haven't dug as deeply into his other works outside of films. I just think that tickles me. I love that.
and the perfect pop culture circle of John Waters coming back on a Criterion Collection release of Beyond the Valley of the Dolls to talk about it in that context. It's just like, what a weird world we live in.
Yeah.
It's also worth mentioning that like Pink Flamingos wasn't really well reviewed across the board. So it's not like Ebert was an outlier, like he was kind of just trying to, you know, poke at it or anything. Like it wasn't really well reviewed. And there's that like great theatrical trailer for Pink Flamingos, has like barely any footage of the movie and like no critic reviews. It's just like footage of people coming out of the theater and then being like, what did you think? They're like, I threw up. And it's just like, that's what sold that movie for so long. So I think it's just the kind of thing that's like critic proof. Like it didn't really need an endorsement from anyone except people just to be like, that was crazy. And then everybody went to go see it. And that's kind of like what those midnight movies were for a long time.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, so what if you rated that 0? It's a midnight movie classic, like along with like, what is it? Night of the Living Dead and like Rocky Horror. Like it's something that is so iconic, and people tend to forget about it. But like Rocky Horror Picture Show is still something that is so like broad throughout like the United States and everything. But that was also like Pink Flamingos, Female Trouble, all that good stuff is a part of that time era.
Yeah, and even like El Topo was part of that era too, where
Mhm.
that's such a high art film too, where it's just like these were the God, I wish I was a movie watching person during that, alive and a movie watching person during that time, because what a great set of marquees to go to on the weekend.
Ryan, any more questions?
Yeah, actually, we got hit with a lot of good ones. So I'm going to close the books on questions. So because we've got 3 questions in a statement, I'm going to get to the statement real quick. From Steve, everyone must watch Mommy Dearest with the John Waters commentary on DVD. It is absolutely perfect and hilarious. So putting that out there to y'all. All right,
Yes,
so I'm gonna go. Okay, my first question of the three to wrap us up comes from Kyle. Thoughts on the directorial revisionism as far as music and aspect ratio changes in some re-releases of films like Multiple Maniacs, even if it clearly improves the production quality of the film? Meaning, do you have thoughts on that, those directorial revisionism as far as those music and aspect ratio changes?
I mean, as far as the soundtrack, I mean, he probably couldn't clear rights for some of that stuff, so it's either you replace the music or it doesn't get released, so I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I think I actually started watching an interview about the re-release of Multiple Maniacs, and John Waters very clearly said when he was making it, the soundtrack was on physical magnetic strips, you know, the 16 millimeter equipment that he was filming on. He's like, I didn't want it to look that way. Not like I was trying to make it look dirty. It just was. So as far as what I've heard from John Waters is that he was fully supportive of those restorations, because he said that was never my intention, was to make it look gritty or sound gritty. So as far as I know, he has his artistic approval on his content with being re-released.
Yeah, I think he said something along the lines of like, they made Multiple Maniacs look like a Cassavetes film.
Yeah.
And he loved that. So I
Yeah.
think Janice worked on that restoration.
Yes, yeah, they did.
Yeah, there was, when they did the retro of his stuff at Lincoln Center, they did a night that was called Celluloid Atrocity Night, and it was Mondo Trasho and Multiple Maniacs, and then the 8mm shorts. And when they started Mondo Trasho, it just died. Like the print couldn't even go through. So the print of that and Multiple Maniacs were like the only prints, and they were just in John Waters' attic. And when he introed it, he's like, this is the last time these will be shown this way. Like, I never want people to see them like this again. We're doing restorations, and like, that's what I want out. And it's like, there's, you know, the revisionism of kind of like the George Lucas school of revisionism. I can see people are like bitter about it, because like you grew up with like Star Wars being a certain way. But were people growing up with Mondo Trasho being a certain, like, I don't really know that. It's like this kind of thing that's existed so much on like kind of bootlegs or like subpar, just like VHS rips and stuff. Like nobody's really seen Mondo Trasho correctly unless you like saw it back when it came out theatrically. So there's not really like, I don't understand like the kind of nostalgia that people might have for it, unless you're just nostalgic for seeing something look like shit, which we know there are those people.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't really understand those complaints for these, because they're clearly like what was intended to be.
Well, when I saw Mondo Trasho for the first time, it was on MySpace, because somebody had uploaded the entire film on MySpace video. So I watched it there, low quality. It was not a great experience.
I love you so much, Adriana.
We had a public access channel here when I was growing up, that it was curated, though it had a lot of public access to it, but there was a station that did stuff. And I, as a child, was able to watch Mondo Trasho on there. They just put it up late at night one night. And so I guess technically that's my first John Waters movie, though I didn't really understand the scope of it. And I also watched Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story, the same way. Like, they were just these 16mm prints just being sent around places, and just be like, well, I guess we'll just throw this on television tonight on public TV. And so, yeah, seeing it that way was one thing. But yeah, I'm all for a director being able to say, you know what? It's been like 30 years. We can improve this a little bit. As long as he's not trying to, Richard Kelly with Donnie Darko and try to do something that he really shouldn't have. He's just
with Cruising, or like so many of his other movies.
Yeah, exactly. Or Disney Plus with The Simpsons.
Ooh.
All right, Adriana, you ready for the next question?
Yeah, I think we're ready.
All right, from Emily, have any of you experienced polyester in Odorama? It was groundbreakingly wild and showcased his sense of humor with its timing and choice of smells. Any thoughts on it if you have experienced Odorama?
I have, because when I bought the polyester DVD, it came with an Odorama card. It wasn't the original card, it was a reproduction, obviously. But my experience with that was, it was fun, but then when you put it back in the case, the next time you open the case, it reeks. It's it's not fun once you scratch all that stuff off. Yeah, but it was an interesting concept, and I think it actually kind of like served the movie pretty well. But it's not. I think John, what he was doing there was he was trying to like invoke the spirit of William Castle with his sort of like gimmicks.
Absolutely.
And I thought it was fun.
Yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead.
So I never had a direct experience with the Odorama cards other than the theater that I managed in San Diego, the Ken Cinema, which is now shuttered pre-COVID. It had been operating since 1946 or 47. Up in the attic, it was basically a living museum, and we had multiple original Odorama cards. And when I met John Waters, at the book signing, I was about to lose my mind, just like blacking out, total fangirl status. And, all I could say was, I love you. And I just want you to know that at the theater I manage, we have these Odorama cards at the Ken Cinema. And he totally, he knew the theater. He said, I can't believe you managed that place. You always premiered my films. And I've always been so thankful. And he kind of turned to his agent and had said we were looking to do a John Waters Christmas at the Ken, the company that's associated with the Ken. There was so much red tape. Of course, nothing that cool could happen despite the history of what happened in the single screen cinema. So I just had to say I was blessed to be working in a place for so long that just had those original cards, and that it kind of came full circle when I met John Waters, that he said, yes, you always showed my movies. And so maybe I should order it on DVD and get my own card and relive it.
Yeah, I think I don't know, I have the Criterion here. The Criterion's got a copy in it. Yep. Got your little Odorama card on the Criterion.
Mm-hmm.
I have not scratched it yet, and it still smells okay. So, but yeah, once that gets scratched, it's got to put it in a picture frame and say goodbye to it.
Mm-hmm.
I was running a theater in New Hampshire like 10 years ago, and I played polyester and asked New Line for the cards, and they're like really big. And the way they ship them, because they smell so bad, is you basically get this like giant cardboard box, like almost a box that would fit like a TV in it. And they're just like in Ziploc bags and then wrapped and wrapped and wrapped and like plastic wrap and like in a trash bag. They're like so much padding just because of like how much they smell. Because once you put them all together, they just like stink. It's really weird. But the cards, the ones they use for theaters are like gigantic.
I had a brief year as a creative director of an Alamo here in Denver. And we started doing scratch and sniff cards for certain movie event experiences, and I learned that there is a new process that they do with them, which is probably wildly different from the original Odorama cards. But the new process contains the smell a lot more than the other ones. I suppose it was just an unwieldy process of just stamping paper with wet spots and letting them dry. But now apparently it's a lot more refined. So maybe this new style card will last. Who knows? I'll report back someday. Ask me
We
in a
found
year.
the old one. This is the old one.
Yes.
There you go.
Like really big.
Wow, that's like,
Yeah.
the one at the Ken was kind of more of the same size from Keith's Criterion, but those were probably from the original release. And now that you guys are talking about the smell, they obviously weren't scratched, but they were so old that they kind of just all, that attic smell. I feel like those cards just added to that wonderful smell up in the Ken's attic. But those are huge, Justin.
Smells really bad. I just scratched one. It smells bad.
Yeah, that's intense. Yeah, the ones that I would see
It
were,
smells really bad.
yeah. I do, just as we're on it, I just really am interested in the, future of going to the cinema, either post-COVID or as we're adjusting, you know, how we're going to deal with crowds by limiting capacity, or, you know, enjoying the drive-in, that the influence that William Castle had on John Waters with that gimmick. And I do think that Alamo kind of, they've made attempts, of course, over the years to make it a more immersive experience. But rereading Whatever Happened to Showmanship just kind of made me think, like, as we're entering a new world, you know, the old world is gone right now, and especially for cinemas. And I'm really, you know, no gimmick idea is too dumb. I would do even, you know, Spice Girls karaoke at the Ken just to get people hyped up. And, you know, maybe that's not while the movie's playing type gimmick, but I just really hope that, you know, maybe not the wide release theaters or the chain theaters, but art house and independent cinemas will think more in that way of how to make the movie going experience fourth dimensional. And that's kind of like my final word. I just thought it was so relevant right now. Like, how can we keep people from staying off of their couch and coming and enjoying the cinema? And, you know, we might need to entice them with some of these gimmicks to remember the joy of cinema, which it's not as easy for the masses as it is for cinephiles or people who find comfort in the theater.
Ryan, do we have any more questions?
We do, and actually, Sophia gave a great bridge to this last question, mentioning William Castle. Our final question to wrap us up is, who do you think are John Waters' biggest influences?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I know what a lot of his influences are, just because, you know, he's very vocal about that. I mean, he's written an entire book about it called Role Models. But I mean, obviously, William Castle is a big one. As Sophia alluded to, John Waters, many years ago, wrote an essay called Whatever Happened to Showmanship. I forget where it was originally published, but it was reprinted in an essay collection called Crackpot. And that essay is all about William Castle and how he kind of innovated all of these wild gimmicks to get people in seats in the theaters, you know, and they were all kind of like themed around whatever that movie, the movie he release was about. So like the Tingler had buzzers under the seats that would like, you know, zap people in their butts unexpectedly while they watched the movie. Just ridiculous things like that. But I mean, he's also, I mean, as far as film-wise, I think Douglas Sirk is a really big influence on John Waters, especially with, you know, a film like Polyester. He was definitely evoking that Sirkian melodrama. He still loves Little Richard. I mean, that's the reason why he has the pencil mustache. I don't know, what about the rest of you? Like, are there any kind of like, who, when you watch John Waters films, like what jumps out at you as far as like where it seems like he's drawing from as far as like influences or inspirations?
I mean, when I watched this stuff, I definitely had to go back, because you can tell sometimes when he's definitely pointing at something, like, this is my nod to this. So making us do the work, of course, to figure out, like, what movie was that? What director has he watched? And you can kind of go back pre-Pink Flamingos to any filmmaker whose work was ever censored or completely misunderstood, from like Pasolini, you know, and all them, to really understand where he was kind of driving some of those up. But also just stuff on the super fringe, pornography, all those things. I have a stack of Water stuff, Blu-rays over here, but I always think about Ursula Utters in Dirty Shame being influenced from Chesty Morgan and those films. That this was a real human being who had a film career as a wildly big-breasted super agent in all of their films, but that he based a character much later in his career on this one person. And as much as, I mean, Selma Blair is amazing in Dirty Shame with Ursula Utters, but you can just write that off to some degree as like, well, what a wild John Waters-esque character. But then he's like, no. There's a real human being behind where I came up with that. And so go back. I dare you to watch Deadly Weapons, and just be amazed at this person who, you know, for better or worse, you know, lived their life with gigantic breasts, but turned that into a career and made their best of it, made the breast of it.
Yeah, I think there's also like just kind of the ethos of his films and the way they were distributed, especially. I go back to like the 40 Thieves of exploitation. So like Dwayne Esper and like David Friedman, and especially Kroger Babb, who did those like white coders, like Mom and Dad. And you'd kind of go into this theater expecting to see like an educational film about pregnancy, but you were just shown porn. And I think there's kind of this like, not necessarily like a switcheroo, but sort of this idea of like kind of being a huckster and sort of selling this thing that's forbidden, but has like this merit to it that you weren't necessarily expecting going in. And I think that's like really sly. And you probably mostly get that in Hairspray, which is like the least, you know, explicit movie. But I think there's that kind of idea of like just being subversive, even though people are expecting to see something that's just sensational.
Yeah, I think that he, again, he's like the master of balancing between what influences him and who he idolizes. And I think he's able to blend that and then create what he gives to the world. Like Pia Zadora is definitely somebody that he idolizes. Did she directly influence some characters or some themes? Probably, but he, you know, she was his idol. I really loved the anecdote that he wanted to get the wastebasket that Ingmar Bergman used, so he could throw all of his bad ideas in the same trash basket that Ingmar Bergman did, but it was going for like $35,000, something crazy. And he realized, he's like, this is just like an IKEA trash can. Like, I'm not going to spend that much money. So he found an Australian writer, I believe his name was Arthur Wright. And so he got that author's wastebasket. And I just really love the always throw away your bad ideas to a good place, something along those lines. So I can't speak exactly who influenced him. I'm actually very curious who are his modern influences, and what keeps him going and inspired. I think it's not easy, but it's we're able to see what his early work and what his filmography has given us and what came before that. And I would love to continue to dig into what keeps him ticking.
One thing that I saw that was super cool was that he is very influenced by Andy Warhol, and Andy Warhol did something that was similar to like when Divine did this, acted like JFK's wife in the assassination and everything. And Andy Warhol did something that was similar, and through the grapevine they heard about it, so then they started like collaborating on stuff. And then John Waters would buy like art for Andy Warhol, and Andy Warhol would like send him art and stuff like that. So I thought that was a super cool fact to learn about him.
One last influence to add real fast, Doris Wishman,
Yeah.
a really amazing filmmaker, and the American Genre Film Archive's they got the rights to all her films, and they're working on a collection. It's supposed to come out this summer. I think it's been pushed obviously till the end of the year, but I mean, she essentially made porn, but with very unique plots, like Dildo Heaven, which just go on that name alone. That's all you need to know. So there's a film called Dildo Heaven, directed by Doris Wishman. But in essence, like sort of what we talked about at the beginning, like she made her movies with absolute heart and passion, even though there was something called Dildo Heaven. And that, you know, is the little piece that fits right into John Waters' own heart and brain, to just be like, I like what you're doing there. I'm gonna be influenced by that.
Ryan, any more questions? That was it for the questions, right? All right, then I think that just about wraps it up. Thank you all for joining us for this. It's been a lot of fun. Hopefully you guys had fun too.
Big time. Thank you, Adriana. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Miranda.
Thank
All
you
right.
guys.
And thank you to everybody who tuned in.
Yeah,
I know I
seriously.
had some friends from all different time zones tuning in, so I'm super thankful Keith
Well, to that
Hernandez.
point, actually, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to unmute all the mics. So if you don't mind, give this panel a huge round of applause for coming in, spending some time with us, and talking John Waters. That is going to happen, everybody, in 3, 2, 1.
Woo!
All right, a big thank you to everybody for showing up, for coming to this ArtsQuest at Home presentation. I did forget, actually coming up in just a few days, another movie talk. Kathy Ford from our cinema committee on Sunday at 7 will be talking the HBO movie Normal Heart. So again, that'll be 7 o'clock. On Sunday, artsquest.org/at-home for that. For everything we've got going on, again, a big thank you to those of you, to all of you who showed up. And I want to give another big thank you to our panelists. Those includes Keith Garcia, Sophia Verbiskar, and Justin La Liberty, and also our hosts, Adriana Gober and Miranda Schollenberger. A big thank you to Nick White, our intern, for helping out and making this happen. Again, artsquest.org/at-home for everything we're doing. And another big thank you to BSI Corporate Benefits for their sponsorship of this. And one more big thank you to you for showing up and for allowing us to keep doing what we love to do, which is provide access to the arts to the Lehigh Valley and beyond here at ArtsQuest. My name's Ryan Hill, Program Director at ArtsQuest. I hope you have a great night. I hope you're able to stay safe and continue to stay strong through all this, and we hope to see you again soon. Good night.